My name is Liam, and I am 34 years old. This is a fact that feels both startlingly young and anciently old, depending on the day. On paper, my life is a monument to stability. I am the facilities manager for a small liberal arts college, a job title that sounds important, but mostly involves overseeing the perpetual battle between 19th century plumbing and 21st century student expectations. I own my apartment. It's a one-bedroom in a solid, unexciting pre-war building named the Morningside. My mortgage payments are automated. My car is a sensible, paid-off sedan. My life runs on a schedule as predictable as the tides, a quiet hum of managed expectations. For a long time, after the divorce, this predictability was my sanctuary. It was the antithesis of chaos, a fortress built of routine. Now it just feels like quiet. A quiet so profound it sometimes has a weight to it, pressing down on my chest in the lonely hours after the sun goes down. Sarah, my ex-wife, didn't leave with a dramatic flourish. There was no slammed door, no tearful confrontation in the rain. Our marriage didn't end, it dissolved. It was a slow, silent erosion, like a riverbank giving way to the current over years. The final conversation took place on our beige sofa, the one she'd picked out because it was timeless. She had laid it all out with the calm, detached precision of a consultant delivering a quarterly report. "You're a good man, Liam," she had begun, and I knew, with the sinking certainty of a condemned man, that this was the prelude to the execution. "You're kind. You're dependable. You're safe." That word, safe, she'd used it like a shield, a way to soften the blow. But it wasn't a compliment. It was the diagnosis of a terminal illness. "I just need more," she continued, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "More spontaneity, more excitement. I feel like we're 80 years old already, planning our trips to the garden center." She won a life of exclamation points. And I was a human period. A full stop. The end of a sentence that had gone on too long. She packed her things over the next week, a quiet and efficient process that left my life with neat, empty spaces in the closets and a cavernous void in my chest. Safe. The word echoed for months. It was the reason I was alone in my quiet, orderly apartment. A man who had become a piece of reliable infrastructure in the life of the woman he loved. The apartment across the hall, 3B, had been empty for 3 months, a silent neighbor I appreciated. Then came the storm. Her name was Maya. I first saw her in a state of mortal combat with a fiddle-leaf fig tree that was, by any rational measure, too large for a human to move alone. It was a jungle specimen, a primordial being of leaves and trunk, and she was wrestling through her doorway with a grim determination that was both terrifying and hilarious. She had dirt smudged on her cheek, and her dark hair was escaping its messy bun in wild curls. She grunted, shoved, and finally, with a triumphant cry, got the thing inside, scraping a long green streak along her doorframe in the process. She didn't swear. She laughed, a rich, throaty sound that echoed in the quiet hall. That was the first sighting. The first interaction came 2 days later. I was heading out for work when I saw her standing in front of her door, jiggling the knob with a look of theatrical frustration. "Locked out," she announced to the hallway at large. Can you believe it? First week here, I, being the dependable, capable man Sarah had so accurately described, retrieved my small toolkit. A little work with a tension wrench and a pick, a skill learned from misspent youth and maintained for moments just like this. And her door clicked open. She was effusively grateful, offering me coffee I didn't have time for. The second lockout happened on Saturday. I was coming back from the grocery store. Same scene. Maya, her door, a pantomime of distress. "It's this old lock," she'd sighed, gesturing at the brass knob. "It's so sticky." I was more suspicious this time, but I played my part. I opened her door again. The third time was Tuesday evening. I was taking out the recycling. There she was, phone pressed to her ear in a fake conversation. "No, I'm telling you it's stuck again. I'm locked out," she was saying to her non-existent friend. She hung up as I approached, her expression a careful blend of apology and helplessness. I just raised an eyebrow. And now it was Friday, the fourth time in a little over a week. I opened my door to head to the gym, and there she was, standing in front of 3B, wearing workout leggings and a brightly colored tank top, her brow furrowed in concentration as she once again battled the uncooperative doorknob. She hadn't seen me yet. My first instinct was weary resignation. My second was a flicker of annoyance. But then I saw it. I saw the reason my annoyance wouldn't stick. Half hidden in the palm of the hand holding her phone, the metallic glint of brass was unmistakable. The key. Her key was right there, clutched between her thumb and forefinger. She wasn't clumsy. She wasn't forgetful. She was something else entirely. A schemer. A delightful, ridiculous fraud. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The quiet, predictable rhythm of my life skipped a beat. Instead of sighing and pulling out my tools, I leaned against my doorframe, crossed my arms, and just watched her. I watched the way she chewed on her lower lip, the little huff of breath she let out. I watched her push a stray curl from her forehead. She was a terrible actress, but she was giving it her all. Her frustration was a costume, and it didn't quite fit. It couldn't contain the energy underneath, the mischievous glint in her eyes that I could see even from across the hall. Her eyes were the color of dark honey warmed by the sun, and they were alive with a light I hadn't seen up close in a very long time. She wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a force of nature trying to disguise itself as a minor inconvenience. And for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom, she had decided to aim that force directly at me. The quiet man in 3A. The safe bet. And I found, to my own profound surprise, that I didn't want to retreat. I wanted to see what would happen when the storm finally made landfall. I let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, an audience enjoying the final act of a very strange one-woman show. Finally, I clear my throat. Trouble in paradise again, Maya. She jumped, a theatrical little gasp escaping her lips as she spun around. Her face was a perfect mask of beleaguered surprise. Liam, oh my gosh, you scare me. Yes, can you believe this door? It has a personal vendetta against me. I swear it waits until I'm in a hurry and then just seizes up. She gave the knob another useless, pathetic rattle for emphasis. I pushed off my doorframe and walked slowly toward her, my footsteps echoing in the hushed corridor. I stopped a few feet away, my eyes fixed on the hand holding her phone. A personal vendetta? Huh? That's rough. You'd think for what we pay in rent, we'd get inanimate objects that aren't actively plotting our demise. Exactly, she said, her voice full of righteous indignation. It's a conspiracy. A conspiracy, I repeated, nodding gravely. I gestured toward her left hand. Is that part of the conspiracy too? Maya followed my gaze. She looked down at her hand, at the phone, at the brass key nestled snugly against her palm. Her eyes widened in a parody of shock, so over the top, it was a masterpiece. Oh, she said, her voice a whisper. Well, look at that. She unfurled her fingers, letting the key clink against her phone screen. Silly me. I was holding it the whole time. She let out a nervous little laugh, the sound of a gamble that hadn't quite paid off. The jig was up. The curtain had fallen. She looked up at me, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink, and for the first time since she moved in, the performance stopped. The honey-colored eyes lost their feigned helplessness and were replaced with a wary, yet direct, curiosity. She was waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I'd be annoyed or amused or just retreat back into my apartment and my quiet, orderly life. The old Liam, the one Sarah had left behind, would have mumbled something awkward and made a hasty escape. He was allergic to this kind of unpredictable, unscripted interaction. But I wasn't the old Liam. Not in this moment. I was just a guy in a hallway who was profoundly tired of being safe. A slow smile spread across my face. Silly you, I agreed. So, what's the plan now that your arch-nemesis, the door, has been defeated by your own sheer competence? The relief that washed over her face was palpable. Her shoulders, which had been tensed up to her ears, visibly relaxed. The wary look in her eyes was replaced by that mischievous sparkle I was beginning to find incredibly compelling. Well, she said, tapping the key against her chin, I was thinking of making celebratory coffee. But my rescuer seems to have abandoned his post before the rescue was even complete. I was never your rescuer, I said, leaning against the wall beside her door. I was your co-conspirator, and I take my payment in caffeine. That was how I ended up in her apartment, a place that was the polar opposite of my own. When my walls were a placid, non-committal shade of grayish, hers were a deep, vibrant teal. Where my art consisted of a few framed architectural prints, hers was a chaotic, joyful explosion of canvases, sketches, and photographs, some framed, some just tacked to the wall. The air smelled of coffee and something vaguely citrusy, like paint thinner and oranges. And the fiddle-leaf fig tree, her partner in crime, stood in the corner like a silent, leafy sentinel. We sat at her small kitchen table, a salvaged piece of wood that still had faint rings on it from glasses long since gone. She talked about her work as a freelance graphic designer, her love for ridiculous color combinations, her theory that every building has a personality. She declared that our building, the Morningside, was a grumpy but secretly tender-hearted old man. She gestured to my door across the hall. "And you're welcome, Matt," she said, pointing a finger at me accusingly. "You're welcome, Matt," is aggressively neutral. It says, welcome, but its tone says, please have a valid reason for being here and wipe your feet twice. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. It's a functional object, Maya. It's designed to remove dirt from shoes. No, she insisted, leaning forward, her eyes bright with passion. It's the first word your home says to the world. It should say something interesting. Yours says, I have filed my taxes on time. Mine, she said with a proud flourish, is going to say, hope you brought wine. We talked for over an hour, the coffee growing cold in our mugs. It wasn't a conversation of polite questions and rehearsed answers. It was a rapid-fire exchange of observations, theories, and playful jabs. She had a way of asking questions that felt less like an interrogation and more like an invitation. She didn't just ask what I did. She asked what the most satisfying part of my job was. I told her it was fixing things, the quiet click of a mechanism finally working, the hum of a system brought back into balance. It sounded boring when I said it, the same old story. But she didn't look bored. She nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. So you're the guy who keeps the world from falling apart, she said. The one who makes sure the lights stay on. No one had ever described my job like that. Sarah had called it a steady paycheck. My parents called it a good, sensible career. Maya called it holding the world together. And standing there in her chaotic, colorful, wonderful apartment, I felt a dangerous, unfamiliar flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she saw something more than a safe, dependable man who filed his taxes on time. A few days later, the universe, in its infinite and often ironic wisdom, decided to stage a scene in the building's slightly grimy recycling room. I was breaking down a mountain of cardboard boxes from a new shelving unit, a satisfyingly methodical task. The door swung open, and Maya walked in, holding a single, empty wine bottle by the neck. She smiled when she saw me. Feeding the beast. It's a hungry beast, I replied, flattening a box with a loud crack. Before she could respond, the door swung open again, and my carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. It was Sarah, and she wasn't alone. Hanging off her arm was Julian. Julian was her excitement. He was a real estate developer who wore suits that cost more than my car insurance and had a tan that looked like it was professionally applied. His hair was a work of art, a slick, dark sculpture that probably had its own structural engineer. He radiated a kind of aggressive, predatory confidence that always made me feel like I should check if my wallet was still there. Sarah's perfectly made-up face froze for a fraction of a second when she saw me, then rearranged itself into a mask of breezy nonchalance. Liam, hey, I was just in the neighborhood. I found another box of your old college textbooks. Thought you might want them. She hoisted a small, sad-looking box. It was a pretense, and we both knew it. It was a flyby, a way to show off her new, upgraded life. Julian's eyes swept the room, dismissed me, and then landed on Maya. His smile, a brilliant white slash in his tan face, widened. He was assessing her, cataloging her, and I felt a hot, unfamiliar spike of possessiveness. He then looked back at me, his gaze dripping with a kind of pitying condescension that was his specialty. Liam, good to see you, man. Still holding down the fort here, the Morningside. I see. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look friendly, but felt more like he was checking for structural weaknesses. Keeping things safe. There was again the word. His verbal stiletto slid expertly between my ribs. He winked, a conspiratorial gesture meant to include Maya in the joke being me. I could feel the old programming kicking in, the familiar urge to shrink, to become invisible, to offer a tight, non-committal smile and let the moment pass. It was my default setting. Endure, retreat, survive. But then I felt a subtle shift in the air beside me. Maya had moved just a half step closer. It wasn't a big movement, but it was a deliberate one. It was an alignment, a choice. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her presence as a solid, steady warmth. She was standing with me, not just next to me. And the old programming short-circuited. I looked down at Julian's gleaming, ridiculously expensive Italian leather shoes. Then I slowly raised my eyes to meet his smug gaze. The recycling room suddenly felt very small, the air thick and charged. Yeah, I said, and my voice didn't waver. It was calm, level, and carried a weight I didn't know it possessed. Someone has to. Some of us prefer building things that last instead of just looking for the next shiny thing to break. The silence that followed was stunning. Sarah's jaw literally dropped. The breezy mask slipped, revealing a flash of pure shock. Julian's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened at the edges, the manufactured charm curdling into something hard and unpleasant. The insult had landed, precise and unexpected. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't been aggressive. I had simply stated a fact, and in doing so, I had held a mirror up to him, and he clearly didn't like the reflection. Well, Sarah said, recovering first, her voice a little too high. We should get going. Julian has a reservation. She practically dragged him out of the room, throwing a confused, unreadable look back at me over her shoulder. The sad little box of my books was left sitting on a stack of old newspapers. The door swung shut, leaving Maya and me alone in the sudden, ringing silence. The air still crackled with the ghost of the confrontation. I felt strangely hollowed out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the abandoned box of books, a relic from a life I barely recognized. Maya leaned back against the cool concrete wall, crossing her arms. She was watching me, her head tilted. A small, slow smile touched her lips. She didn't say good job, or that was amazing. She said something better. Something that landed in the hollow space inside me and began to build something new. Building things that last, she repeated softly, the words hanging in the air like a promise. That's it, isn't it? Her gaze was intense, analytical, but kind. They see quiet, and they think it's emptiness. They see calm, and they mistake it for weakness. She took a step closer, and her honey-colored eyes seemed to look right through the carefully constructed walls I'd spent years building. She saw the blueprints. She saw the framework. They don't see the foundation. They don't see the work that goes into making something solid, something you can count on. She held my gaze, and the world outside the dusty, fluorescent-lit, recycling room ceased to exist. I see it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And in that moment, under the hum of the overhead lights, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's discarded lives, I felt seen. Truly, profoundly seen, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The word safe was no longer an indictment. In the space she had created with a few simple words, it was starting to sound like a strength. It was starting to sound like a foundation. And I knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that I wanted to build something with her. The week that followed was a quiet revolution. We fell into an easy, unspoken rhythm. We'd leave our doors open in the evenings while we were both home, a silent invitation. Conversations would drift across the hallway, snippets of our days shared over the sound of her music and my television. I helped her hang a series of floating shelves, a task that required precise measurements and a level, my world of order bleeding into her world of creative chaos. She, in turn, critiqued my spice rack, declaring it an alphabetical cry for help, and reorganized it by flavor profile, a system that made no sense to me, but which she defended with the fervor of a religious zealot. It was in the middle of one of these domestic projects that the serpent slithered back into our hallway Eden. We were attempting to hang a massive, ornate mirror in her living room. It was heavy and awkward, a two-person job that required us to stand shoulder to shoulder, our arms brushing, our bodies close in the small space. Her hair smelled like green apples and coffee. The air was thick with concentration and something else, something unspoken that hummed between us like a live wire. I was holding the bulk of the mirror's weight while she guided the wire onto the hook. "A little to the left," she murmured, her face close to mine. "My left." "I know what left is," I grumbled, shifting my weight. My hand brushed against the small of her back, and a jolt went through me, sharp and clean. She stiffened for a second, then relaxed into the brief touch. And then a sharp, confident knock echoed from her front door, which we had left ajar. Before either of us could move, the door was pushed open and Julian stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and entitlement. He wasn't smiling his usual predatory smile. This one was tighter, more focused. He was a man on a mission. "I was just in the area," he began, a lie so lazy it was insulting. His eyes flicked to me, then settled on Maya with an unnerving intensity. "Sarah mentioned this was your building. Morningside Heights, right?" He sauntered further into her apartment, his hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored trousers, taking in her vibrant, personal space with a look of faint disdain. He was a sterile, monochrome photograph in a room bursting with color. "I have to say, it's a bit quaint. For someone with your obvious taste." He gestured vaguely at a bold, abstract painting on her wall. "You seem like more of a downtown loft kind of girl. Exposed brick, industrial windows, you know the vibe." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a carefully deployed cloud of condescension. "I actually know a fantastic realtor who specializes in just those kinds of properties. I can make a call, get you a private viewing of a few places this weekend." The move was so blatant, so audacious, it almost took my breath away. He wasn't just insulting my home, my life. He was trying to physically remove her from it. He was treating her like an object to be acquired, a beautiful piece of art he wanted to hang in a more prestigious gallery. He was trying to prove a point, that he could take anything or anyone he wanted, especially if it was something that belonged, even tangentially, to Sarah's safe ex-husband. The mirror in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, an anchor pulling me down. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't get angry. She didn't even look at him. She slowly straightened up, taking a small step away from me, breaking the fragile bubble of our proximity. She turned and picked up a small, whimsical ceramic bird from a nearby shelf, its glaze a brilliant turquoise. She tossed it gently from one hand to the other, her movements calm and deliberate. "Aloft?" she said, her voice deceptively sweet, the sound of honey laced with arsenic. "No, I don't think so." She stopped tossing the bird and held it in her palm, studying it as if it were the most fascinating object in the world. "I hate drafts. They're so uncommitted, blowing in from everywhere." She looked up, but her gaze went past Julian, past the door, as if he were a pane of glass. "And I really hate people who assume they know my taste." Then, in a move of such breathtaking finality, it was like a physical blow. She turned her back on him completely. She placed the ceramic bird carefully back on its shelf and looked directly at me, her eyes clear and steady. The entire universe of the room contracted to the space between the two of us. Julian, the real estate mogul, the man of action and excitement, had been rendered utterly irrelevant. "Liam," she said, her voice perfectly normal, as if they were the only two people in the room. "Do you think we need to move it another inch to the left?" The dismissal was so total, so utterly complete, that for the first time since I'd met him, Julian was speechless. He stood there for a beat, his mouth slightly open, a man who had just walked into a glass wall he hadn't seen. He made a small, sputtering noise, a protest dying in his throat. Then, with a huff of indignant air, He turned on his heel and walked out, pulling the door shut behind him with a sharp, definitive click. The sound echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. The mirror was forgotten. The nail on the wall was forgotten. There was only the charged space between us, crackling with the aftermath of the confrontation. Her defense of me, of US, of our shared space, was so fierce and so effortless it left me reeling. The games were over. The ridiculous, charming pretense of the lockouts was a distant memory. This was real. The stakes had been raised, and she had, without a moment's hesitation, gone all in. I looked at her, at this incredible woman with a ceramic bird and a spine of steel, and I knew my quiet, safe, predictable life was over. And I had never been so grateful. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We hung the mirror. We straightened the rug. We made small talk about the weather and a new coffee shop that had opened down the street. But the undercurrent was still there, a powerful, invisible tide pulling us toward a conversation we both knew was inevitable. The air was thick with things unsaid, with the ghost of Julian's intrusion and the echo of Maya's fierce defense. Around 9 o'clock, she walked me to my door. The hallway, once the stage for her comedic lockouts, now felt like a sacred, liminal space. "Thank you for the help," she said, her voice soft. "Anytime," I replied, my own voice sounding rough to my ears. We stood there for a moment, caught in a silent standoff, neither of us willing to be the first to retreat. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went back into her apartment, closing the door gently behind her. I spent the next hour pacing my living room. I straightened my already straight books. I wiped down my already clean countertops. My mind was a chaotic jumble of her voice, her eyes, the feeling of her standing beside me in the face of Julian's condescension. My world, which had been a carefully curated collection of neutral tones, had been irrevocably splashed with her vibrant, wonderful color, and I didn't know how to go back. I didn't want to go back. Just as I was convincing myself to call a night, to let the moment pass and hope for another one tomorrow, there was a soft knock on my door. I knew it was her. My heart gave a painful lurch. I opened the door, and she was standing there, barefoot, wearing a soft, oversized sweater that fell off one shoulder. Her expression was serious, stripped of all artifice. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I just nodded and stepped back, letting her in. I led her not to my beige sofa, but to the small, two-chair balcony that overlooked the city's distant, glittering skyline. The night air was cool and smelled of asphalt and the faint promise of rain. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of traffic a distant, rhythmic shushing. She was the one who broke the silence, her voice quiet but clear in the darkness. That whole lockout thing was pretty ridiculous, wasn't it? A faint, self-deprecating smile touched her lips. "I'm not usually that clumsy." She took a deep, steadying breath, turning to face me, her profile a beautiful silhouette against the city lights. "Liam, why did you play along?" The question was a scalpel, direct, precise, and aimed right at the heart of the matter. There was no room for evasion, no space for a carefully constructed, safe answer. She wanted the truth. She deserved the truth. I looked down at my hands, resting on my knees. They were capable hands, hands that could fix a boiler or wire a light fixture, but they suddenly felt clumsy and useless. The words were lodged in my throat, a foreign, terrifying weight. I had spent so long building walls, valuing silence. That honest emotional expression felt like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. But her question demanded it. She had seen me, defended me, and now she was asking to be let in. Because I wanted an excuse, I said, the words coming out in a rough whisper. I forced myself to continue, to give voice to the thoughts I'd been burying for weeks. "I wanted an excuse to talk to you." I finally lifted my head and met her gaze. Her eyes were dark pools in the dim light, patient and waiting. "The first time I saw you, you were wrestling with that stupid, oversized tree. And you were losing. Badly. But you were laughing, not swearing. You were covered in dirt, and you were laughing." A small, surprised smile flickered on her face. And then I saw your apartment. I went on, the words coming more easily now, a dam breaking. You filled it with color and art and life. My place is beige. It's designed not to offend anyone. Your place is designed to make you happy. I took a breath. And it's because when you talk to me, you actually listen. You don't just wait for your turn to speak. You ask questions nobody else asks. You call my job keeping the world from falling apart. Everyone else just calls it a steady gig. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, closing the distance between us. I played along, Maya, because for 4 days in a row, you were the most interesting, unpredictable, and vibrant thing that had happened in my quiet, predictable life. I played along because you make the hallway feel less empty. The confession hung in the cool night air, raw and exposed. I had laid all my cards on the table, a hand I wasn't even sure how to play. She didn't speak. Her expression was unreadable. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I had miscalculated, that I had read everything wrong, that I was just the convenient, safe neighbor after all. But then she moved. She didn't offer words of reassurance or a polite response. She simply closed the small remaining distance between her chairs. Her hand came up, not hesitantly, but with a quiet, confident purpose, and cupped my jaw. Her thumb stroked my cheek, a touch that was both incredibly gentle and powerful enough to stop my world from spinning. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An answer. She leaned in, her gaze never leaving mine, and the entire sprawling, noisy city outside my balcony faded to a distant hum. The world narrowed to the few inches of charged air between our lips. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a frantic, desperate kiss. It was a kiss of confirmation. It was gentle at first, a soft exploration, a question and its answer all at once. Then it deepened, a slow, unfolding conversation that we couldn't have had with words. It spoke of shared loneliness and unexpected recognition. It tasted of coffee and cool night air and a future I hadn't dared to imagine. It was the moment my quiet, safe, predictable life ended, and a new one, a life of vibrant, terrifying, wonderful color began. Our first official date was not to a candlelit restaurant with a wine list I couldn't pronounce. It was to a place Maya called the Boneyard. It was a massive architectural salvage yard on the industrial outskirts of the city, a sprawling, dusty cemetery for buildings that were no longer standing. Acres of forgotten history lay in neat, categorized rows, stacks of weathered doors with peeling paint, pyramids of porcelain sinks, and racks of intricate ironwork gates that once guarded gardens long since paved over. To anyone else, it might have looked like a junkyard. To Maya, it was a museum of stories. She moved through the aisles with a kind of reverence, running her hands over the cool, smooth surface of a marble mantelpiece or tracing the floral pattern in a pane of stained glass. "Look at this one, Liam," she'd call out, her voice filled with excitement. "Imagine the house this came from. Imagine the hands that opened this door every day for 100 years." She saw not decay, but legacy. I, on the other hand, saw the craftsmanship. I pointed out the tight dovetail joints on an old wooden chest, the solid, hand-forged hinges on a heavy oak door. I explained how the old window weights worked, the simple, brilliant physics of sash and cord. She listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she was genuinely curious, not just humoring me. We were looking at the same objects, but seeing them through our own unique lenses. She saw the soul, I saw the bones. And somehow, together, we saw the whole picture. It was the most perfect date I had ever been on. We spent hours there, lost in the quiet aisles, breathing in the smell of old wood and dust. We ended the day sitting on the tailgate of my truck, eating cheap, greasy pizza from a cardboard box and drinking warm sodas. The sun was setting, painting the industrial sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. It was there, amidst the ghosts of old buildings, that we started to excavate our own pasts. I told her about Sarah. I told her not just about the end, but about the beginning, about how I had loved her quiet ambition, her organized mind. And I told her about the slow, painful process of becoming safe, of how my steadiness, the very thing she claimed to love at first, had gradually become a cage for her. I confessed my deepest insecurity, that I was fundamentally boring, a man destined to be a comfortable, predictable piece of background furniture in someone else's more exciting life. The words, spoken aloud for the first time, felt shameful, but also liberating. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't say, "No, you're not boring." She just listened, her expression thoughtful, her knee occasionally brushing against mine. When I was finished, the silence stretched for a moment. Then she said, she wasn't looking for a foundation. She was looking for a stage. There's a difference. And then she told me about her ex. His name was Anton, and he was a critically acclaimed minimalist painter. He lived in a world of white walls and sharp angles, she explained, tearing off a piece of pizza crust. He thought my love for color was juvenile. Unserious, she described a man who had tried to curate her, as he would one of his exhibitions. He'd suggested what she should wear, introduce her to the right people, and helped her refine her artistic taste, which mostly meant replacing her joyful, chaotic art with his own stark, sterile canvases. He didn't want a partner, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He wanted a perfectly composed accessory. He saw my energy, my vibrance, as something to be captured and framed, not something to live with. He wanted to own the light, not stand in it with me. We sat there, two survivors from different shipwrecks, recognizing the same scars on each other. We had both been with people who had tried to edit us, to sand down our edges until we fit into a preconceived notion of what they needed. They had failed to see that the parts of us they were trying to change were the very essence of who we were. In that dusty, forgotten corner of the city, we offered each other a quiet, profound understanding. We weren't broken. We had just been poorly matched, trying to fit keys into the wrong locks. The integration into each other's lives after that was a slow, natural creep, like ivy finding its way up a trellis. It started with small, almost unnoticeable things. A brightly colored coffee mug of hers appeared in my dish rack, a defiant splash of turquoise in my sea of white ceramic. I found myself at the hardware store one Saturday and bought a specific type of washer I knew would finally fix the persistent drip of her kitchen faucet, a task I performed that afternoon without her asking, earning a brilliant surprise smile. She began leaving things for me on my refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a cat. Sometimes it was a funny cartoon she'd torn out of a magazine. Other times it was a quick, brilliant sketch she'd done of one of our neighbors, capturing their essence in a few deft strokes. My sterile, functional fridge became a rotating gallery of her wit and talent. One afternoon, I came home from work to find a new welcome mat outside my door. It was a cheerful, grassy green, and in bold, looping script, it said, "Hello, gorgeous." I stood there for a full minute, just staring at it, a slow, stupid grin spreading across my face. My aggressively neutral, functional object had been replaced by a daily affirmation. It was the most wonderful, invasive thing anyone had ever done. My quiet, orderly world was being systematically and joyfully dismantled. There were now 2 toothbrushes by my sink. Her ridiculously floral-scented shampoo had colonized my shower. I sometimes came home to find her asleep on my beige sofa, curled up under a garish, multicolored afghan she'd brought over, a sketchbook lying open on her chest. My apartment, once a silent sanctuary of predictability, was now filled with the sound of her laughter, the scent of her perfume, and the beautiful, wonderful clutter of her life intertwining with mine. And I discovered that my fortress hadn't been keeping the chaos out. It had just been keeping the life out. And I had never, ever felt more at home. 2 years. That's how long it's been. 2 years is a blink in the grand scheme of things. But for me, it's an entire geological epoch. The Liam of 2 years ago is a fossil, a man preserved in layers of beige sediment. I see traces of him sometimes in my reflexive need to make a list or my instinct to read the instruction manual cover to cover, but he is a relic of a former age. We didn't stay at the Morningside. As much as we loved our hallway, our lives and our collective belongings were beginning to burst at the seams of our 2 small apartments. We didn't get a sleek, downtown loft with exposed brick, Julian's vision of Maya's life remained a laughable fiction. Instead, we did something far more us. We bought a house, a small, run-down bungalow on the quiet, leafy edge of the city. It was a disaster. It had, as the realtor cheerfully described it, good bones and a lot of potential, which is real estate code for prepare to hemorrhage money and sacrifice all your weekends for the foreseeable future. It was perfect. For the first 6 months, our life was a chaotic ballet of demolition and construction. I became the man I was always meant to be, covered in a fine layer of sawdust, my days dictated by the logic of load-bearing walls and electrical wiring. I rebuilt the bones of the place, shoring up the foundation, reframing the walls, bringing the plumbing and wiring out of the dark ages. I was building something that would last, not with metaphors, but with lumber and copper and sheer force of will. And as I built the structure, Maya breathed a soul into it. She followed in my wake with a paintbrush in one hand and a wild, brilliant idea in the other. She filled our home with color, with textures, with light. She spent weeks painstakingly stripping layers of dreary wallpaper to reveal the original, warm brick of a fireplace. She haunted flea markets and estate sales, returning with mismatched, beautiful furniture that held the ghosts of other lives. Our house became a living testament to our partnership, my solid, dependable structure filled with her joyful, unpredictable art. We adopted a dog from a local shelter, a scruffy, one-eared mutt named Gus who possesses a boundless, idiotic optimism and a singular talent for digging up the petunias. Maya is determined to grow in the front yard. He is the furry, chaotic embodiment of our life together. Tonight is our housewarming party, the culmination of a year of hard work. Our friends and family are due to arrive in an hour, but we're outside in the backyard, tackling one last project. A web of string lights is meant to crisscross over the small stone patio, creating a canopy of soft, golden light. I am perched precariously on top of a stepladder, clipping the last strand in place on a hook I've screwed into the eaves. Below me, Maya has her hands planted firmly on the sides of the ladder, holding it steady. The late afternoon sun filters through the leaves of the old maple tree, dappling her in shifting patterns of light and shadow. She's wearing paint-splattered jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, as she has never looked more beautiful. She shields her eyes, looking up at me. "How's it looking up there, Foreman?" "Almost done," I say, giving the wire a final tug. "Just don't let go." I have a sudden, vivid fear of falling and breaking my everything right before our first ever party. "Never," she says, her grip tightening reassuringly on the ladder. "I've got you." Her gaze softens, a familiar, fond look that still makes my heart do a stupid little flip. "You know," she says, her voice thoughtful, "I was thinking about the front door the other day. It's a good, solid door. Very practical. It is, I agree, cautiously beginning my descent down the ladder. Came with the house." "I know," she continues, a mischievous glint entering her honey-colored eyes, the same glint I saw in the hallway of the Morningside all that time ago. "But I was thinking we should replace it. Get a new one. Maybe a vintage one. Something with a really tricky, sticky, unreliable old lock." I reach the last rung and step onto the solid ground of the patio. I turn to face her, standing so close I can see the tiny flecks of gold in her irises. The scent of cut grass and her green apple shampoo fills the air. The memory of her standing outside her apartment, key hidden in her hand, is as clear and bright as if it were yesterday. The ridiculous, wonderful beginning of all. I reach out and tuck a stray curl behind her ear, my thumb brushing against her cheek. I look at this incredible woman who didn't just see a quiet man, but saw a strong foundation. Who didn't just see a boring, beige apartment, but saw a blank canvas. The woman who saw me. A slow smile spreads across my face. "You won't need it," I say softly, my voice thick with a depth of feeling that still surprises me. "You've had the key to this place from the very beginning." Her answering smile is brilliant, luminous, lighting up her whole face. She knows I'm not talking about the house. She leans in and kisses me, a sweet, familiar kiss that tastes like home. Above us, as if on cue, the sun dips below the horizon, and the string lights I just hung flicker to life, casting our new, beautiful, vibrant world in a soft, perfect glow. Have you ever felt completely misunderstood by someone who was supposed to know you best, only to have a near stranger see you perfectly in a single moment? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to read about the moment you finally felt seen. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.